The Crow by James O'Barr, written and illustrated. So you may be familiar with this work as the source material for the classic 1994 film starring Brandon Lee, who was tragically killed during its production. When I say classic, I do mean classic. That movie kicks so much ass, and having read the comic upon which it is based now, I can happily report that the comic kicks ass too, although they do differ. So, what I would like to do here today is to review James O'Barr's original work, The Crow, as well as talk about the film that was based upon it and kind of how they compare. So, join me, won't you? The Crow. What is the story of The Crow? What tale does this comic tell? So, the story of The Crow is not too terribly complicated. Um, Eric and Shelley are a young couple madly in love with each other, living in Detroit, one of America's most infamous shitholes. One day they are violently attacked by a gang of hoodlums, and Shelley is raped and murdered, and Eric himself is murdered. However, 1 year later, he finds himself resurrected by a mystical crow to enact his bloody vengeance against those responsible for his death and that of his beloved. So yeah, that's pretty much the story. Like I said, it's not terribly complicated. It's a pretty straightforward revenge tale. As the Crow, Eric goes about slaughtering his way through the Hoods who slaughtered him and Shelley. So the genesis of The Crow was actually a personal tragedy in the life of its author. James O'Barr, when he was a young man, I believe his fiance, I think, or girlfriend at least, was killed tragically by a drunk driver. A devastating event which put him in a very dark place mentally. But he took that pain and he took that anger and he channeled it into this, The Crow, which is something of a work of violent catharsis, which allows him to exact a wrathful retribution on the page, which he was unable to do in real life. And the fact that this was spawned by a real life tragedy is apparent in just about every panel. I have never in my life read a work any kind of any medium which drips with so much pain and so much anguish. Like it is palpable in this work that this was a product of heartache. Like it, you can feel it. It runs off this page, off every page in this work. It's just in your face, just pain and heartache and tragedy. And it is very, very viscerally effective. And The Crow is also a very, very gothic work. James O'Barr, there are a lot of the chapters in this work are named after Joy Division songs. In fact, there are like entire, like he recounts the entire lyrics of various songs kind of throughout this, as well as poetry by like Baudelaire and Rimbaud. Mr. O'Barr is a pretty literate fellow, it seems like, and I'm going to go on record right now saying that I think The Crow might be the most gothic work of any medium ever created. I mean, this is gothic to the max. It has all the makings of gothic in it. You have a passionate romance which ends tragically. You have a downright tortured protagonist who cuts himself in the throes of his anguish, as well as paints his face like Alice Cooper. It is again, I think, the most gothic thing I have ever encountered. And you know, you might not think it to look at me, but to paraphrase Norman Osborn, you know, I'm something of a goth myself, as indicated perhaps by my musical tastes, such as this album right here, which according to South Park, I believe, is the greatest album of all time. Or, you know, maybe that, or that, or that, perhaps. You get the picture. In fact, hang on just a moment, in fact, if you don't mind. Yes, there's nothing more gothic than a black peacoat. With this, I feel I'm properly attired to review this work. But anyway, so back to speaking on The Crow. This book is really well illustrated. To speak, usually with a book, I would talk about like the prose, but with this being a comic, I'll have to talk about the art. And the artwork in The Crow is really good. It's really, really striking. If only because of the contrast, because there's so much black in this book. It's illustrated in black and white, and it really does contrast quite strikingly. Although at times there's so much black in it that it actually kind of gets a teensy bit murky at times, where it's kind of hard to tell exactly what's happening. But luckily, it doesn't do that very much. So really, I can commend it mostly on the art. It's very striking, like I said, due to its contrasting colors. Although, like I said, at times it does get a tad murky. But the characters in this, well, really, we only have Eric, um, our protagonist, the Crow. Other than him, there's really not many characters of much depth, except Shelley in the flashback scenes, because this work kind of follows a pattern. You get violent, homicidal vengeance, and then followed by kind of an interlude, which includes flashbacks, usually to Eric and Shelley's life together before their deaths. And really, that's where the comic actually is the most interesting and also the most painful, because it's in those sections which actually aren't the violent murder sections. It's in the flashback stuff of Eric's and Shelley's life together, which is really where the most power comes from. And honestly, some of that's kind of hard to read, actually. Like, you can really tell that this work was just coming from right out of a place of pure pain and torture. Because, again, some of that stuff in there is just kind of hard to read. This is a very painful work. It's very raw and authentic when it comes to its torment, I would say. But yeah, Eric is really the only character in here besides, I guess, Shelley, who is sufficiently rounded. The hoods that he hunts down to kill. Honestly, I don't even remember which ones were which, whose names went with who, because there's quite a few of them actually, and the whole book is just him, killing his way through their ranks. And again, they're not very deep. They're basically just names for him to channel his rage against. But where it counts with the protagonist, it's pretty well done. Eric is a very, very tormented protagonist in this. Again, there's some self harm in here. It's again very, very raw, but you really do get a great insight into his mind, his tortured, twisted mind, and how much he hurts without Shelley there. Again, seriously, some of that in there is kind of hard to read. So the characters, where it counts, is good enough. The art, also good enough. And the story is pretty well done. It's pretty well paced. And like I said, it kind of follows a pattern. You get violent kill, interlude, violent kill, and then, well, I won't give away the ending, but it concludes pretty well, I think. So to rate James O'Barr's The Crow, I'm going to give this an A. I really am. It may not be the most complex thing, it may not have the most finesse to it, but what The Crow lacks in complexity and finesse, it more than makes up for with a grand sense of style, as well as an aching sense of emotion, which really powers it and which is palpable on basically every page. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, The Crow is a hard A. It really is. It's that good of a work. It's very, very powerful. It really is. So now let's talk about the film that's based upon it. The 1994 film The Crow, in which Brandon Lee played Eric in the movie, his name is Eric Draven, I think, but in this, we never learn his last name. It's just Eric. So the film changes quite a bit, although it does retain the core essence of the comic. It does shift some things around. So one, um, the manner of like their assault in this is different. They're like Eric gets thrown out of the tenement house, and that's not what happens in there. They get waylaid on the side of the road after their car breaks down, and also the nature of the hoods that assaulted them is different. And the order in which he kills them is kind of different, and the ways in which he kills them is different. It kind of set up like a hierarchy in the film as he's working his way up Detroit's crime ladder. Not really what happens in this. There's also more depth given to the people that he kills in the film, which is not really in here that much. But also, one of the major differences in the movie is the nature of the crow. And I mean, like, literally the crow, the bird, which follows him around. So in the movie, there's like an actual crow that like resurrects him, and it just kind of flies around throughout the movie and follows him. And that's not really what happens in the comic. The comic is much weirder, actually. In fact, it's downright kind of surreal at times. So the crow in the comic is like it talks. It like talks to him, and I think it's more like in his head. It's not really outside of him. It's like a hallucination kind of. Um, and then there's also this like skeleton guy who shows up in at times which I never really understood the nature of. So again, it's weirder than the movie was, and like genuinely kind of surreal at times. But like I said, the core essence is retained in the film. It's about a guy who was killed along with his girlfriend, and he, came back from the dead and is now out for blood. It keeps the main gist of it true. Although in the film, the main bad guy is like Detroit's crime kingpin with his, I guess, is it like his half sister or something that he kind of has a quasi incestuous relationship with, and they're kind of like into the occult, and like the crow, they learn like they can kill the crow and they can kill him. Yeah, that's not in here. He's practically unkillable in this. They had to change that for the movie because they needed to give the hero some kind of kryptonite to make it more um, make up the ante a little bit, because in this he literally pretty much can't be killed, and so he just slaughters his way through all those guys with very little trouble. So I understand why they had to change some things, but like I said, the heart of it is still the same. But speaking on the film, I will go on record as saying The Crow has one of the greatest soundtracks out of any film ever made. That is right. You've got an original song by The Cure. You've got that Stone Temple Pilots song. Nine Inch Nails did a pretty good cover of Joy Division's Dead Souls. And I also want to say this: the Cure, the song that the Cure did for The Crow, I wholeheartedly still believe is the greatest song that the Cure ever did. Actually, The Crow is how I ended up getting into The Cure, actually, because I heard that song and it was such a banger, and it's still such a banger, and I think it's still the greatest song that the Cure ever did. And I didn't realize it, but the lyrics for that song, some of them, were actually lifted right out of the comics, such as "Don't look, don't look." That's in here, and "Don't wake at night to watch her sleep." That's also taken from in here, and so I really do like that, how well that song really fits with the movie, as it should, because it's taken like the film was from the same comic. And like I said, I still think that's the greatest song that The Cure ever did. Just you cannot beat that song "Burned" by The Cure. That's just a hella banger there. But yeah, The Crow by James O'Barr, just a really fantastic work. It really is. I'm giving it an A. It's not perfect. Again, it's none too complicated. It's very direct towards its end goal. But it has so much heart in it, and again, so much heartache. Some of this stuff, once again, is just really kind of hard to read. There's some real pain in this, and it's just readily apparent when you're reading it. And I really can't give The Crow anything but an A because I freaking love this. This is maybe one of the best comics I've read, or at least read in quite some time. Very stylized art, which occasionally kind of gets a little bit too murky. A very tortured but understandable protagonist, and a story that really kind of is a vehicle for its author to grapple with the trauma that he himself had endured. And so it's something that I think a lot of people can really sink themselves into, especially if they've endured anything like that. Again, it's a kind of a work of violent catharsis, but and also the basis for a really great movie. So, The Crow by James O'Barr. Have you read The Crow, or have you seen the classic film from the 90s? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything that I have said here today. And if you haven't read The Crow, oh hell yes, I could recommend this. This is a humdinger of a comic. Again, it's not too complicated, but it's very viscerally powerful and emotionally effective. So, yes, I could highly recommend The Crow. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.